The universe doesn't wait for your words. It never has, and it never will. What it waits for, what it has always waited for, across every era of human history, across every civilization that rose and fell and left its wisdom encoded in stone and symbol and story, is your vibration. The frequency humming beneath every thought you've ever had. The silent signal broadcasting from the center of your chest long before you learned to speak. Long before you had a name for what you were feeling. Long before anyone told you what was and wasn't possible for someone like you. And here is what nobody tells you. That signal has been transmitting your entire life. Every moment, without pause, without fail. The question was never whether the universe was listening. The universe is always listening, always reading, always responding with a kind of perfect, unwavering precision that would astonish you if you could see it clearly. The only question that has ever actually mattered is whether the signal beneath your words, beneath your effort, beneath the surface performance of wanting and hoping and trying, has been aligned with what you say you desire, or whether it has been broadcasting something else entirely, something older and more deeply installed. Something that sounds less like a command and more like a question, less like certainty and more like please. You didn't find this by accident. Let that settle into you before anything else. You didn't stumble here the way you stumble across a random recommendation. Something in you, something older and more precise than your conscious mind, something that operates below the threshold of deliberate thought, sent a signal out into the field. And what came back was this. Right now, these exact words, arriving in your awareness at this exact moment in your life. This is what summoning looks like. Not candles and incantations and elaborate ritual. A soul that finally reached the frequency of readiness, and a universe that always keeps its promises. Welcome to MindRise Audiobooks. What you're about to receive isn't information. It isn't content. It's a remembrance. And there is a difference between those things that you will feel more clearly as we move forward together. For centuries, the knowledge encoded in these words was guarded, not hidden out of cruelty or elitism, but out of necessity. Truth of this magnitude, handed to someone whose frequency isn't yet ready to receive it, doesn't illuminate. It distorts. It gets filtered through the lens of the unprepared mind and emerges as something smaller and more manageable. A technique, a trick, a system to follow, stripped of the living power that made it worth preserving in the first place. The keepers of this wisdom understood something that our speed-obsessed, information-saturated culture has almost entirely forgotten. Readiness isn't a destination you arrive at by accumulating the right knowledge. It's a frequency you reach by living, by questioning, by sitting with the discomfort of knowing that the life you're living and the life you know is possible for you are not yet the same thing. And when that frequency is reached, the teaching finds you. The book appears on the bench. The words arrive in your ears at 3 in the morning. The conversation happens with the stranger who says the exact thing you needed to hear. The teaching always finds the ready student. Always. The cosmic green light. Across traditions separated by oceans and centuries and languages that share no common root, this concept appears and reappears, described in different vocabularies, encoded in different symbols, taught through different stories, but pointing always to the same precise reality. The moment when the universe shifts from observing your desire to mobilizing its infinite resources to fulfill it. The threshold where the gap between wanting and receiving collapses not gradually, but completely. Where manifestation stops being a process you're working through and becomes a reality you're inhabiting. You are at that threshold right now, not approaching it, standing on it, and everything is about to change. There was a woman named Eleanor who spent 3 years searching for a particular book. She had no idea what it was called. She didn't know who wrote it. She knew only the feeling she was reaching for, that specific sensation of recognition, of something clicking into place behind her sternum, like a key finding its lock after years in the wrong doors. She visited libraries in 3 cities. She spent weekends in used bookshops, pulling volumes off shelves, reading first pages, waiting for the click. It never came in any of those deliberate searches. And then one Tuesday morning, having taken a different route to work because of construction on her usual street, she passed a bench outside a coffee shop she'd never visited. A book had been left there. She almost didn't stop. But something, that quiet, reliable, inexplicable something, slowed her steps. When her fingers touched the cover, she felt it. The click, the recognition, the absolute knowing that this was what she'd been reaching for, and it had found her, in the form of a left-behind book on a bench, on a street she'd never walked before, on a morning she wouldn't have been there if not for road work she'd cursed when she first encountered it. Every variable had been arranged, not by coincidence, by correspondence, by the unbreakable law of resonance that governs the quantum field underlying all physical reality. Like calls to like, readiness draws what it's ready for, and the universe coordinates delivery through whatever pathways are available, including roadwork, including detours, including everything you thought was inconvenient and in the way. Your internal frequency, the composite vibration of your beliefs, your emotional baseline, your deepest settled sense of what's true about you and what's possible for you, broadcasts outward into the field at every moment. Not occasionally, not when you're meditating or affirming or consciously trying to manifest. Continuously. And the field responds not to the surface content of your thoughts, not to the words of your affirmations, not to the intellectual framework you've constructed around what you want, but to the energetic signature beneath all of that, the frequency beneath the frequency, the signal that's broadcasting even when you're not paying attention to it, especially when you're not paying attention to it. A traveler named Silas crossed a desert that had taken the lives of many explorers before him. His water ran out on the 4th day. By the 5th, his awareness had narrowed to a single point, And here is the extraordinary thing about Silas. In that extremity, something in him stopped fighting with reality. Not fighting to survive. His body was still moving, still pressing forward. But the desperate quality of his thoughts, the bargaining, the fear, the frantic internal calculation, quietly dissolved. And what replaced it was something he couldn't have named or described, but that felt underneath the physical suffering, like absolute trust. Not optimism, not denial. Something deeper and more structural than either. A bone-level certainty that he would not die in that sand. On the morning of the 6th day, he found the well. Ancient stones, perfectly cool despite the hammering heat. The keeper of the well, an old man who seemed to exist outside any particular era, told him something that Silas spent the rest of his life unpacking. The well had always been there, visible from the paths that countless explorers had walked, but it could only be perceived by those whose inner frequency matched the frequency of provision. Desperation and provision exist in different vibrational registers. They cannot perceive each other.
Silas had found the well not despite his extremity, but because inside it he had accidentally stumbled into genuine trust. And trust, real trust, not performed trust, is one of the highest vibrational states available to a human being. The universe responds to it the way a compass responds to true north. Immediately, completely, without negotiation. This is the summoning power. It is the capacity that has resided within you since before your first breath, and it is not something you develop through effort or accumulate through study. It is something you remember. The difference between development and remembrance is the entire difference between striving and arriving. Development implies starting from zero, building upward, earning your way toward a capability you don't yet possess. Remembrance implies the capability was always there, fully present, fully intact, and your entire journey, every struggle and breakthrough and moment of darkness and sudden clarity, has been the process of clearing away everything that obscured it. You are not becoming a conscious creator. You are remembering that you always were one. Inside you, right now, there is a receiver and transmitter of extraordinary sensitivity. The human bioelectric field extends several feet beyond the physical body. Your heart alone generates an electromagnetic field 60 times stronger than the brain's. These fields communicate, they broadcast, they influence the probability distributions of the quantum field in ways that science is only beginning to document, but that mystics and wisdom keepers mapped centuries ago with a precision that modern instrumentation is now beginning to confirm. Your inner state is not private. It is perpetually broadcasting into the field around you, shaping the probabilities of what enters your experience. Margaret was a radio operator who spent 40 years working with signal equipment that others found temperamental and unreliable. She had a reputation among colleagues for receiving transmissions that technically shouldn't have come through, signals below the threshold of audibility, communications other operators would classify as interference. When asked how she did it, she always gave the same answer that frustrated her more technically minded peers. She got quiet. Not the equipment, herself. She said that when her internal noise dropped below a certain threshold, she could hear transmissions that had always been there, broadcasting continuously, awaiting a receiver calibrated to their frequency. Near the end of her career, she stopped touching the dials entirely during difficult transmissions. She simply closed her eyes, steadied her breathing, and listened from somewhere deeper than her ears. The signal always came through. Your limiting beliefs are the static in that transmission. Every conviction you carry about what's possible for you, about what you deserve, about how the world works and where you fit within it, these are not neutral observations of reality. They are interference patterns. They cloud the signal you're sending and distort the signal you're capable of receiving. The ancient wisdom keepers had a name for them. They called them veils. 7 of them, each one a different category of illusion that the human mind constructs between itself and the full truth of its creative power. The veil of separation whispers that you stand apart from what you wish to create, that the thing you want exists over there, and you exist over here, and the distance between you is real and permanent. The veil of limitation draws a circle around what's possible and insists that anything beyond that circle isn't worth reaching for. The veil of unworthiness runs the cruelest program of all, the quiet background belief that the life you long for isn't meant for someone like you. The veil of victimhood wraps every difficult circumstance in a narrative of powerlessness, training you to see yourself as the product of forces beyond your control. The veil of scarcity insists there isn't enough, not enough abundance, opportunity, love, and that any gain for you means loss for another. The veil of time creates the illusion that what you desire is perpetually far away, that manifestation is a slow and uncertain journey requiring endless waiting. And the veil of impossibility maintains that certain things simply cannot happen, regardless of intention or faith or frequency. These veils don't feel like illusions when you're inside them. They feel like facts. They feel like clear-eyed assessments of reality. That's the nature of a veil. Transparent enough to seem like ordinary perception, dense enough to block everything worth seeing. But every single human being who has ever shifted from a life of resignation to a life of conscious creation has done so by piercing through at least one of these veils. And every time one veil dissolves, the others become thinner, because they aren't separate structures. They're one composite illusion that only maintains its solidity when all 7 pieces are held in place simultaneously. Remove one, and the whole structure becomes less convincing. Remove 3, and you begin to see a world you never knew was there. There was a woman named Grace who lived in a mountain village where thick fog was simply the permanent condition of existence. She had never seen a clear day, not once in her life. She'd grown up understanding, in the way you understand things that have always been true, that the world was gray and close and bounded, that the vast open landscapes described in books were the inventions of writers with overactive imaginations. The fog was just the way things were. And then, one extraordinary morning, a warm wind moved through the valley. In less than an hour, the fog lifted completely, and there, spread before her astonished eyes, was a world of such scale and color and magnificence that she stood without moving for a very long time. Emerald forests stretching beyond anything she'd imagined, sapphire lakes, mountains whose peaks touched clouds that were, for the first time in her life, far away rather than wrapping around her face. The shock she felt wasn't only the shock of beauty. It was a more specific and more disorienting shock. The recognition that this world had always been this enormous, this magnificent, this present. Nothing had changed about the world. Everything had changed about what she could perceive. That fog is your veils, and the warm wind is already moving. The universe doesn't communicate in language. It never has. Long before human beings developed the extraordinary complexity of linguistic expression, the universe was orchestrating, responding, creating, coordinating in its original tongue, the language of energy, of frequency, of resonance and vibration. This is the language your emotions speak fluently and continuously, whether you're conscious of it or not. Every feeling you experience broadcasts a specific signal into the quantum field, and the field responds to that signal not symbolically, but literally, by organizing physical reality around the frequency it's receiving. A man named Joseph traveled extensively through regions where he spoke none of the local languages. He arrived in each new city with nothing but his presence and whatever he carried internally. And something remarkable and consistent happened everywhere he went. The quality of his experience reflected his internal state with uncanny precision. In cities where he arrived carrying guardedness and low-grade anxiety, he encountered friction, doors that didn't open, faces that remained closed. In cities where he arrived carrying something that the people he met could never quite name, a kind of settled warmth, an openness that had nothing to prove, the opposite occurred. Strangers invited him home. Opportunities appeared before he'd had time to look for them. The cities hadn't changed between his visits. The variable was always only him. Your emotional broadcast is the most powerful communication you have access to, and most people are broadcasting unconsciously, transmitting the accumulated static of old fears, inherited limitations, and the low-grade anxiety of daily life, and then wondering why the universe seems unresponsive or random or indifferent. It isn't. The universe's response is always perfect. It is always precisely matching the frequency it receives. The question is only whether that frequency is being transmitted with intention or by default. There are 5 elements that compose what the ancient traditions called the complete command. The full energetic communication that the universe receives as unambiguous instruction. Intention sets the direction. Without it, energy scatters in all directions simultaneously and moves nothing. Attention amplifies the signal. What you focus on, you energize without exception. Emotion provides the power, the fuel that drives the frequency beyond the threshold of mere thought into genuine transmission. Expectation creates the magnetic pull, the specific difference between hoping something might happen and knowing it will. And gratitude completes the circuit, closing the loop between what you've commanded and what you've received, confirming to the universe that you are a vessel through which abundance flows reliably and with recognition. When these 5 elements align simultaneously, not sequentially, not approximately, but precisely and genuinely, something happens in the quantum field that the materialist framework cannot adequately explain, but that every master of conscious creation throughout history has recognized, named, and taught in their own vocabulary. The field responds, not eventually, now. The physical manifestation may not appear instantly, though sometimes it does, and those moments are worth paying attention to. But the shift in the underlying field that makes physical manifestation inevitable is immediate. The cosmic green light activates, and once it's on, it doesn't flicker, it doesn't waver. It illuminates the entire path from where you are to where you're going, and the universe begins moving everything necessary into position. This isn't something being given to you today. This is something being returned to you today. Something that was always yours, that you set down somewhere along the way, that you forgot you'd set down, that you've been reaching for ever since without quite knowing what you were reaching for. The cosmic green light isn't an external permission. It's your own frequency finally recognized, your own creative power finally remembered, your own voice finally spoken clearly enough for the universe to hear not just the words, but the signal beneath them. The signal that says, not please, but rather, it is done. The antenna is awake. The frequency is clear. The cosmic green light is already pulsing in your direction, and this is only the beginning of what you're about to remember. There is a moment, and if you've ever touched it, even briefly, even accidentally, you know exactly what this means. When something you've been chasing stops feeling like a chase. The straining quality disappears, the calculating and reaching and monitoring dissolve, and what replaces them is something quieter and more absolute than anything effort has ever produced. A knowing. Not a hope you're sustaining through repetition, not a conviction you're defending against doubt. A knowing, with the same quality of certainty with which you know the floor will hold your weight when you step out of bed in the morning. You don't negotiate with it. You don't affirm it 17 times before you trust it. You simply know, and in that knowing, something fundamental shifts in the relationship between you and reality. The distance that felt so permanent begins to collapse. What was over there begins appearing over here. What felt impossible begins feeling inevitable, and you realize, with a clarity that arrives all at once rather than building gradually, that this state, this specific quality of settled, unforced, unchased certainty is what the universe has been waiting for from you all along. This is what the ancient teachers called the unwavering command. Not the loudest command, not the most elaborately constructed or most frequently repeated command. The one from which all doubt has been genuinely removed, not suppressed, not overridden through willpower, not buried under layers of positive thinking, but dissolved, the way fog dissolves when the sun reaches a certain angle and the atmospheric conditions for fog simply cease to exist. The doubt doesn't go somewhere else, it stops being real, and in its absence, the command lands in the quantum field with a clarity and force that the universe cannot and does not ignore. Before we go deeper into the mechanics of this, and the mechanics matter enormously, more than the spiritual traditions have always been willing to admit, something needs to be said directly about what most teachings on this subject quietly avoid. The reason most people's commands don't land isn't that they're not trying hard enough. It's almost always the opposite. They're trying too hard. And effort in the domain of frequency-based creation is not neutral. It actively works against the result you're reaching for. Not because the universe rewards laziness or passivity, but because the energetic signature of straining, of pushing hard toward something from a place of anxious need, broadcasts a specific frequency, one that says, underneath all the positive language layered over it, I don't have this yet. I'm not sure I'll get it. The getting feels far away and uncertain and fragile. That signal, regardless of how beautifully worded the affirmation is layered on top of it, is what the field receives. And the field, being the perfect mirror it is, reflects that signal back with flawless accuracy. Not yet, still uncertain, still far away. A lighthouse keeper named Edward spent 40 years on a cliff above some of the most treacherous coastal waters in his region. He watched ships navigate those passages every night of those 4 decades, through every variety of weather, and he observed something that maritime authorities never formally studied, but that he knew with the certainty of long experience. The steadiness of a signal mattered more than its brightness. Ships could navigate by a consistent light of moderate intensity far more reliably than by a brighter light that wavered. The wavering created confusion at exactly the moment clarity was most needed. The ships that moved through the worst storms cleanly and confidently were commanded by captains who maintained exactly the same quality of focused, settled attention in the fiercest conditions that they maintained when the sea was perfectly calm. Not more intensity during the storm, the same intensity. Not gripping the wheel harder when the waves came, holding it with the same steady grip they used in still water. The storm didn't change their relationship to their command. Nothing did, because a genuine command doesn't require favorable conditions to remain a command. It remains what it is regardless of what the weather is doing. An unwavering command has 5 essential qualities. Singular focus, not the exclusion of all other thoughts, because that's not how consciousness works, but a clear primary intention that doesn't fragment into a dozen competing wants pulling in different directions simultaneously. Emotional congruence, a felt sense that genuinely matches the command, not a performed enthusiasm layered over an undercurrent of fear, because the universe reads the undercurrent, not the performance. Present tense embodiment, inhabiting the reality of your desire as though it already exists, because in the quantum field, where all possibilities exist simultaneously, it does exist, right now, and your job is to match that frequency rather than reach toward it from a distance. Grateful expectation, the specific emotional signature of someone who knows the package is already on its way and is simply going about their life while it arrives, not someone still wondering whether they placed the order correctly or whether it will actually show up. And detached certainty, the paradoxical art of caring deeply about your desire while remaining completely unmoved by whether it arrives through your preferred route or on your preferred timeline. That last quality is where most people encounter their most persistent and least recognized resistance. Detachment sounds like not caring, like giving up,
like spiritual bypassing dressed in elegant language. But genuine detachment from outcome has nothing to do with indifference. It is the specific emotional freedom that comes from absolute trust.
The state of someone who has placed their order with a kitchen they know is extraordinary, with a chef they trust completely, and is now having a genuine conversation with someone at the table rather than repeatedly flagging the waiter to ask whether the food is almost ready. The food is coming. The order was placed correctly. The kitchen is working. The timeline is the kitchen's domain, not the diner's. And the anxiety about that timeline doesn't cook the food faster. It only makes the waiting smaller and harder than it needs to be. In a valley that seemed untouched by the noise of the world, lived a woman named Caroline, who had inherited an instrument of peculiar and extraordinary nature. It looked like a speaking trumpet, crafted from metals that shifted color depending on the quality of light around them. The instrument had one remarkable property that Caroline discovered slowly through years of experimentation she couldn't have explained to anyone else. It would only amplify words spoken without a trace of doubt. Words tinged with uncertainty emerged from its bell as near silence, barely a whisper regardless of the volume she used. Words colored by anxiety came out distorted, the meaning scrambled. But words spoken from a place of complete inner certainty, the specific kind of certainty that needs no external evidence because it exists prior to evidence, that arises from somewhere deeper than the calculating mind, rang out from the instrument with a resonance that seemed to change the quality of the air. Caroline spent years learning to find that place inside herself, not learning to speak loudly or confidently in the performed sense, learning to locate the place where genuine certainty lived, independent of circumstances, independent of evidence, independent of whether anything in her external life confirmed what she was saying. When she finally mastered it, the instrument became almost beside the point, because the quality she had spent years finding through the instrument had always been inside her. The instrument had only been helping her discover what was already there. Your voice, the energetic transmission of your genuine inner state, is that instrument. And everything you've been through has been teaching you, one experience at a time, to locate the place from which genuine commands are issued. Not wishes, not requests dressed in the language of commands. Commands, clear, clean, settled, certain, spoken from the place in you that has never been afraid, that has never doubted your fundamental worth, that has always known beneath everything the world has told you about who you are and what you're allowed to have, that you came here to create. Now, the sovereign declaration. This is where the tradition has sometimes been misrepresented, and it's worth being completely clear about what it is and what it isn't. The sovereign declaration, speaking your reality into existence with the authority of someone who knows their command will be fulfilled, is not an act of ego. The moment the ego is involved, the command weakens, because ego-based declaration carries within it the subtle vibration of compensation. I'm declaring this loudly because part of me is still not sure it's true. And the field reads the uncertainty behind the declaration, not the declaration itself. Genuine sovereign authority has nothing to prove. It doesn't need volume or repetition or performance. It speaks quietly, completely, with the settled assurance of someone who simply knows. The way a master craftsman knows the nature of the material they're working with, not arguing with the wood, not demanding that the clay behave differently than its nature allows, but reading what's true and working with it from a place of earned, deep, unshakable confidence. A woman named Lydia discovered an ancient scepter in an estate she'd been cataloging. Every expert agreed it was remarkable, extraordinarily old, covered in symbols that no one could fully decode, clearly significant. But what she noticed, and couldn't explain in any framework available to her at the time, was that the scepter felt different in different people's hands. In the hands of people she privately recognized as genuinely secure, not arrogant, not performatively confident, but deeply settled in themselves in a way that required no external confirmation, it seemed to warm slightly, to carry a subtle hum at the edge of perception. In the hands of people performing confidence, it remained cold and inert, just an old object. She eventually stopped trying to explain this observation to others, but she kept it close. It taught her something about the nature of real authority that she'd been reaching toward without a framework for years. Real authority can be felt. It cannot be faked, not in ways that count, not in ways that the deeper laws of reality respond to. The emotional crucible. This is the alchemical heart of everything, the principle that sits at the center of the entire architecture of conscious creation, the one that all the practices and techniques and wisdom traditions are ultimately pointing toward. Your emotions are not the side effect of your reality. They are the cause of it, not partially, not metaphorically, actually, precisely, with a directness that most people find either liberating or deeply uncomfortable, depending on what they've been telling themselves about why their life looks the way it does. The specific frequency of feeling you sustain, not occasionally, not in dedicated practice sessions, but as your dominant emotional baseline, the tone of feeling that runs underneath your daily experience, the way music runs beneath a film, is what the quantum field is reading and responding to at every moment. This is why two people can hold what appears to be the same intention, follow the same practices, speak the same affirmations, and produce completely different results. The words and practices are the container. The emotion is the content. The universe responds to the content. Always, only. Joy accelerates manifestation with the force of a precisely directed, high-intensity beam. Not happiness. Happiness is a pleasant response to favorable circumstances. Joy is something deeper and more independent than that. Happiness requires something to be happy about. Joy arises from contact with what you fundamentally are, from the specific vibration of alignment between your inner frequency and the truth of your nature as a creative being in an abundant universe. When you're in genuine joy, you are, in that specific moment, operating at the exact frequency of your highest creative power. Gratitude creates a resonance so precisely aligned with abundance that it functions less like an emotion and more like a direct instruction broadcast into the field. More of this. I recognize this. I am the kind of being for whom this is natural and welcome. Wonder keeps the channel open, prevents the calcification of certainty into rigidity, maintains the quality of receptivity that allows the universe's orchestration to arrive through unexpected and unplanned pathways. And love, genuine love, not the possessive or conditional or transactional kind, but the open, expansive, source-connected quality of love that exists independent of what it's receiving in return, broadcasts at frequencies that every wisdom tradition across every culture has described with the same word: divine. A humble garden keeper named Charles, who tended the grounds of an ancient monastery, made a discovery he shared with almost no one, because he understood accurately that it would be received as impossible. The plants in his care responded not to his physical tending alone, though he tended them with extraordinary care and consistency. They responded to the quality of feeling he brought to the work. He tested this quietly over many years, documenting results in a private journal. Plots he tended in states of genuine love and joy consistently outperformed plots he tended with identical physical care, but in states of distraction or emotional neutrality. The difference wasn't subtle. It was dramatic and consistent and reproducible. Overnight transformations. Growth that exceeded what the conditions should have permitted. A vitality that other gardeners in the region attributed to soil composition or microclimate. Explanations that satisfied them, but that Charles knew were pointing at the right outcome while missing the actual variable. The variable was always, only, frequency. What this means for your own creative process is both simpler and more demanding than most teaching suggests. Every moment you spend in genuine joy, not performed joy, not forced positivity, but the real thing, arising naturally from gratitude or beauty or the specific pleasure of being alive, you are transmitting a signal that the field reads as your truth. Every genuine moment of gratitude for what already exists in your life right now broadcasts a frequency that the universe reads as an instruction to continue and amplify. And every time you touch the specific quality of wonder, that open, astonished, genuinely moved quality of perception that children have naturally and adults have to consciously recultivate, you are holding your channel in a state of maximum receptivity, cleared of the interference that most commonly blocks the delivery of what you've commanded. The rhythm of creation has 4 distinct beats, and most seekers master only the first one. The command, clear, genuine, unwavering, spoken or felt from the place of sovereign certainty. The release, surrendering all attachment to how and when and through which route the universe delivers what you've commanded. The active receiving, positioning yourself in genuine openness, remaining alert and responsive to the orchestration already underway around you. And the gratitude, not as a technique performed at the end of a practice session, but as a living quality of appreciation woven through your entire experience, confirming continuously to the field that you are someone through whom abundance flows and is recognized and is welcomed. The release is as important as the command, and it is where most sincere seekers lose momentum without understanding why. When you release your desire, not abandon it, not give up on it,
but genuinely surrender your grip on exactly how it must arrive. You create the energetic space necessary for the universe to do what it does with extraordinary competence. Orchestrate delivery through pathways you couldn't have planned and wouldn't have imagined. The universe operates through an intelligence that vastly exceeds the planning capacity of any individual human mind. When you insist on controlling the route, you limit the resources available to the delivery to only those pathways your mind has already conceived of. When you release the route while holding the destination with unwavering clarity, you make available every possible pathway, every synchronicity, every unexpected connection, every fortunate timing, every apparent coincidence that the universe specializes in generating when the frequency conditions allow it. A farmer named Howard inherited land marked at each corner by ancient stones carved with symbols that took him years to fully understand. When he finally decoded them, they described 4 phases of cultivation that clearly described something far beyond agriculture. Plant with certainty, release with trust, tend with presence, receive with gratitude. For the years before he understood the stones, he had been farming with genuine intention, but without the complete cycle, planting with hope, monitoring with doubt, struggling for control over outcomes, and receiving whatever arrived with suspicion rather than recognition. When he finally began honoring all 4 phases with equal seriousness, his land transformed in ways that the history of that soil didn't suggest were possible. Not through magic, through alignment with a cycle that had been operating perfectly all along, patient and available, waiting only for him to stop interrupting it. You are not separate from the cycle of creation. You have never been separate from it. You are inside it at every moment, whether consciously or by default. The only question is whether you are moving through its 4 beats with awareness and intention, or stumbling through them in the dark, wondering why the harvest keeps disappointing you while you plant in fear and harvest in doubt, and wonder what you're doing wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. You never were. You simply haven't been shown the full cycle. Until now. The cosmic green light activates not when you finally say the right words or perform the right ritual or think the right thoughts with sufficient consistency. It activates when your frequency, the actual, felt, lived quality of your inner state, genuinely matches the state of someone who already has what they've commanded. Not pretending to be that person, not performing that person for an audience of one, actually inhabiting, even briefly, even imperfectly, the frequency of having rather than the frequency of wanting. Because the universe doesn't read your intentions. It reads your frequency. And frequency is always, only, the truth of what you are in any given moment. That truth is what you're aligning right now, word by word, moment by moment. The signal is getting cleaner. The interference is dropping. And the universe, which has been listening all along, which has never stopped listening, which will never stop listening, is beginning to receive you with a clarity it hasn't received you with before. The green light is shifting.
feel it. There is a law operating beneath every visible surface of your life. Not a law written in books or enforced by institutions. A law as fundamental and as indifferent to your awareness of it as gravity. It was operating before you knew it existed. It is operating right now as you receive these words. And it will continue operating long after this moment, with or without your conscious participation. The law is this: your reality is a mirror, not a metaphor for a mirror, not a mirror in the poetic sense that artists and philosophers use when they want to say something evocative about the relationship between inner and outer experience. An actual mirror, precise, faithful, immediate, utterly without opinion about what it reflects. Your external world, in every detail from the sweeping patterns of your relationships and finances and health, down to the specific quality of the Tuesday afternoon you're having right now, is a direct and accurate reflection of your internal state, of the frequency you've been broadcasting, of the beliefs you've been holding, consciously and unconsciously, about who you are and what the world is and what's available to a person like you. This is not a comfortable truth for most people to sit with, because it removes every available external explanation for the shape of your life. It makes the economy irrelevant as a reason. It makes your history irrelevant as a reason. It makes other people's behavior and the circumstances you were born into and the opportunities you were or weren't given, all of it irrelevant as a final explanation for where you are right now. Not irrelevant as factors that shaped your frequency. Those things absolutely influenced the signal you've been broadcasting. But irrelevant as the cause of your current reality. Because the cause of your current reality is always, only, your current frequency. And your current frequency is the one thing in your entire existence that you have complete and absolute power over. This is the most liberating truth available to a human being. And it is also, for many people, the most frightening. Because liberation and responsibility arrive together. You cannot have one without the other. The moment you fully accept that your reality is a mirror, that it cannot show you anything other than what you're holding within, you accept simultaneously that you are the author of your experience, not the victim of it, not the passive recipient of what the universe randomly decides to send your way. The author, the commander, the conscious creator who has always had the pen and is only now beginning to write deliberately. A man named Theodore once discovered this truth in the most uncomfortable and unavoidable way possible. He walked into a hall lined with mirrors unlike any he had encountered before, each one revealing not his physical reflection, but a vivid, detailed scene from his life. His strained relationships, his financial struggles, the dreams he'd been postponing for years, each one a little further away each time he looked. One mirror showed him surrounded by walls so familiar he hadn't noticed they were walls. Another showed opportunities dissolving at the precise moment his hesitation reached its peak. He stood in that hall for a long time, not because he was fascinated by what he saw, but because he recognized it, because he knew, with the specific, uncomfortable certainty of genuine recognition, that what the mirrors were showing him wasn't happening to him. It was coming from him. That every one of those reflections had originated in something he was carrying inside, something he had been carrying so long he'd stopped being able to distinguish it from the nature of reality itself. The moment of that recognition, that specific, shattering, liberating moment when you stop seeing your circumstances as things happening to you and begin seeing them as things coming from you, is the moment everything becomes available. Because you cannot change a mirror by rearranging what's in front of it. You can only change a mirror's reflection by changing what's standing before it. And you are what's standing before it. You have always been what's standing before it. The circumstances of your life will change. They must change. It is the law. The moment you genuinely change the frequency you're broadcasting into the field. There was a woman named Martha who lived in a house she experienced as perpetually dark. She spent years frustrated by the poor light, blaming the position of her windows, the angle of the sun in her particular part of the world, the neighbors' trees that had grown too large and blocked what little natural light might otherwise have reached her. A wise woman came to visit one afternoon and said nothing for a long time. Then she took a cloth and began cleaning the windows. Layer after layer of accumulated dust and grime fell away, and as the cloth moved across the glass, light flooded the room. Not new light, not light that hadn't been there before, but the light that had always been available, finally finding a clear surface through which to enter. The light was never missing, the wise woman said, without drama, without judgment. It only needed something clean to come through. Martha stood in the transformed room and understood something she hadn't been able to reach through years of blaming the sun. Your perception is those windows, and the work of conscious creation is, in large part, the work of cleaning them, removing the accumulated layers of old belief, inherited limitation, unconscious conviction, and misidentified experience that have been filtering and distorting what's available to enter your reality. Not forcing new light in from outside, clearing the surface through which the light that has always been there can finally reach you. Now consider the language through which this clearing happens. Not the language of words, though words have their role and will come to it. The language of energy, the original tongue, the primal communication system that operates beneath every word you've ever spoken, beneath every intention you've ever formed, beneath every desire you've ever held. The language of vibration, of frequency, of the specific quality of feeling that you embody in any given moment. This is the language the universe reads. This is the signal it responds to. And this is the language in which you are always, whether consciously or not, making your commands. There are 5 sacred elements of this energetic language, 5 components that, when they align simultaneously rather than separately, produce what the ancient traditions described as a complete command, a transmission so clear and coherent that the quantum field has no ambiguity about what it's receiving and responds accordingly, with total, unhesitating mobilization. Intention provides the direction. Without a clear intention, energy disperses into the surrounding field without organizing anything, like water poured onto flat ground with nowhere to flow. Attention amplifies the signal. Whatever you place your sustained, genuine attention on, you feed with life force. you energize, you draw into greater reality. Emotion provides the power that drives the frequency beyond the threshold of mere mental activity into genuine creative transmission. Thought without feeling is a spark without fuel, capable of light but not of fire. Expectation creates the magnetic pole, the specific vibrational difference between someone who hopes their desire might arrive and someone who knows it will. The same difference in frequency that separates a question from a statement, a wish from a command. And gratitude completes the circuit. It is the closing of the loop, the energetic acknowledgement of receipt that confirms to the universe you are a reliable and recognizing vessel for its abundance, which is what abundance requires before it will continue flowing. When these 5 elements are genuinely present simultaneously, not performed, not constructed through technique, but actually felt, actually lived, actually embodied in the frequency you're inhabiting, the cosmic green light activates, not as something granted from outside you, as the natural consequence of your alignment. The way a tuning fork doesn't receive its note from somewhere else, it produces it through the specific quality of what it is, through its own nature vibrating in resonance with the frequency it was made for. A musician named Elena once described the experience of playing her instrument at the highest level not as making music, but as discovering it, as though the melody already existed, fully formed and perfect in the air around her, and her instrument was simply the mechanism through which it became audible to others. She said that on the nights when this happened, when the music played itself through her rather than being constructed by her, her hands moved in ways she hadn't consciously directed, producing passages of beauty that genuinely surprised her as they emerged. She attributed this not to exceptional talent, which she considered relatively ordinary among serious musicians, but to a specific quality of emotional presence she'd spent decades learning to inhabit. When she played from that place, that precise intersection of complete intention and complete surrender, of total engagement and total freedom, what came through her exceeded by a significant margin what she was capable of planning or constructing deliberately. The music was always there. She had simply learned to stop getting in the way of it. The invisible bridge. Between where you are standing right now and where your desire exists, already real, already fully formed in the quantum field of infinite possibility, there is a bridge. It is not visible to physical eyes. It does not appear on any map. You cannot find it by searching for it in the way you search for a route on a screen. It reveals itself only to those who step onto it with unwavering certainty, who place their foot into what appears to be empty air and discover, in the moment of genuine trust, that solid ground appears beneath them. This is not a comforting metaphor designed to make uncertainty feel acceptable. This is a description of how the quantum field actually operates. Observation collapses possibility into specificity. Expectation creates the very pathway to what is expected. The bridge of faith doesn't exist before you step onto it. It materializes in direct response to the quality of your trust. And it disappears the moment your trust does. In a desert city described in the oldest of the old stories,
A traveler named Richard stood at the edge of a canyon so vast and deep that the other side seemed to belong to a different world entirely. His destination was visible across the gap. He could see it clearly, could feel its pull. But no bridge existed. A figure appeared from the morning haze, stepped directly onto the empty air above the canyon, and walked. With each step, a shimmer of crystalline light appeared beneath the figure's foot, solid, stable, real. Then remained as the next step was taken. A bridge was building itself in real time, step by step, in direct response to the quality of trust each footfall carried. Richard followed. His first step was the hardest. The second was easier. By the seventh, he stopped looking down. The divine orchestration. This is the part of conscious creation that the rational mind finds most difficult to accept and most beautiful once it does. As your frequency aligns and your command is transmitted clearly, and your trust allows the field to work freely, the universe doesn't deliver your desire through a straight line between where you are and where you want to be. It delivers it through something that looks, from inside the experience,
like a series of unlikely coincidences, unexpected encounters, surprising turns, apparent detours that somehow lead more directly to the destination than any planned route would have. This is not chance. This is orchestration. The universe working through the full complexity of the quantum field to coordinate an arrival that satisfies not just the surface form of what you commanded, but the deepest truth of what you actually need. A woman named Catherine once entered an ancient labyrinth carrying a carefully memorized map. She had studied the layout, counted the turns, memorized the sequence. 3 right, 2 left, 7 passages straight. She followed her map with precision and found herself going deeper and deeper into the wrong part of the labyrinth, further from the center rather than closer. In her frustration and exhaustion, she stopped. And in the silence of that stopping, she heard something she had been too busy following her map to notice. A faint melody drifting through the stone corridors, subtle but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the center. She abandoned the map. She followed the music. The seemingly random turns organized themselves around the melody's pull, and within minutes she stood at the heart of the labyrinth, wondering how a route she hadn't planned had delivered her somewhere no route she had planned ever had. Your map is your conscious plan for how your desire should arrive. The music is the universe's orchestration. They are not the same thing, and the music knows the labyrinth far better than the map does. A composer named Marcus spent years laboring over his music, deliberately placing each note through a process of conscious construction that produced work his peers respected, but that left audiences technically impressed and emotionally unmoved. The breakthrough came when he stopped composing and started listening, when he learned to enter a state of receptive stillness and allow the music that was already there, already fully formed in some dimension of existence that his deliberate mind couldn't access, to move through him rather than be constructed by him. In that state of active receptivity, music arrived through him that he could not have written through effort. Symphonies of a beauty that surprised him as much as anyone. He didn't become a better composer. He became a clearer channel. And the difference in the output was not a matter of degree. It was a matter of kind. This is active receiving, the third beat of the creation rhythm, the one most commonly skipped by those who understand commanding and releasing, but haven't yet understood that there is a specific, cultivatable skill in receiving. Many people block their own manifestations not by commanding incorrectly or releasing incompletely, but by being closed to the form in which what they've commanded actually arrives. The universe delivers through available pathways. Sometimes those pathways look exactly like what you imagined. More often, they look like something you wouldn't have thought to ask for, something that turns out, in retrospect, to have been exactly right in a way your conscious planning could not have achieved. A fisherman named Patrick had spent years casting his nets with perfect technique at the optimal times in the most promising locations. His results were consistently disappointing, and he had spent years puzzling over the gap between his effort and his outcome. The answer arrived one morning when he looked at his boat differently. Not at his technique, not at the water, but at the vessel itself. His boat was cluttered, absolutely filled with old equipment he no longer used, supplies that had passed their utility, gear that belonged to an earlier phase of his work that he'd never cleared away. There was genuinely no space for a significant catch. He spent one afternoon clearing the boat completely. He returned the next morning with the same technique, the same timing, the same locations. The ocean delivered beyond anything his years of effort had produced. Nothing had changed about the water. Everything had changed about his capacity to receive what was already available. Your receiving capacity is your boat, and the universe cannot fill what isn't clear. The harvest principle closes the cycle of this understanding with a truth so fundamental that, once you've genuinely internalized it, you cannot look at any circumstance of your life the same way again. Your thoughts are seeds. Not metaphorically, they are the actual, literal seeds from which every circumstance you experience grows. Without exception, without randomness, without the possibility of a different harvest from the seeds you've actually planted. The soil is the quality of your emotional field, rich and fertile when your dominant frequency is one of love, joy, expectation, and gratitude, depleted and resistant when your emotional baseline is fear, doubt, resentment, or resignation. The water is your attention. Whatever you consistently focus on, you nourish, and what you nourish grows, regardless of whether you want it to or not. The sunlight is your expectation, the specific warmth of knowing that calls growth upward toward manifestation the way the sun calls plants from the earth. And time is the season, the necessary interval between planting and harvest that cannot be rushed, but can be completely, unconditionally trusted. A woman named Naomi inherited a walled garden from her grandmother, along with a letter that described the garden's extraordinary nature. The plants, the letter said, respond not to care alone, but to consciousness. Naomi spent the first season testing this skeptically, tending with perfect physical care, but doubting the letter's claim. The garden produced adequately exactly what the soil and conditions suggested it should. The second season, she tried something different. She began bringing the full quality of her consciousness to the work, genuine love for each plant, genuine certainty that it would flourish, genuine wonder at the process of growth. The garden transformed beyond anything the physical conditions should have permitted. Not slightly, dramatically, unmistakably in ways that other gardeners visited specifically to witness and could not explain through any framework available to them. The garden was not magic. The garden was a mirror. It showed Naomi, season by season, with perfect botanical precision, exactly what she was broadcasting into the field. And when she changed the broadcast, the harvest changed accordingly, as it always does, as it must. Because the law of the harvest is the same law as the law of the mirror. Your external reality cannot produce anything other than what your internal state is genuinely planting. You are planting right now, in this moment, with the quality of feeling you're carrying as you receive these words, with the frequency that's humming beneath your surface thoughts, with the settled certainty or the quiet doubt that lives in the deepest layer of your relationship with what's possible for you. The seeds you're planting right now are already growing. The harvest is already in motion. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that makes all of this worth understanding at the deepest level available to you, is that you can change what you're planting at any moment. The field doesn't hold grudges. The soil doesn't remember last season's doubt with resentment. Every moment of genuine frequency shift is a new planting, and the field responds to the new planting immediately, with the same faithful, indifferent, perfectly reliable precision with which it has always responded to whatever frequency it receives. The cosmic green light is not the end of a process. It is the beginning of a new relationship with reality, one in which the gap between planting and harvest grows shorter as your frequency grows clearer, as your command grows steadier, as your trust grows deeper, as your gratitude grows more genuine and continuous and independent of what the current harvest looks like. Plant deliberately, trust the season, and prepare to be astonished by what's already growing. Something is already different. Not in the world around you, not yet in any way that your eyes can confirm or your hands can touch, but in the field, in the quantum layer of reality that underlies everything visible and tangible and measurable. Something has already shifted, because you have already shifted, and the field responds to shifts in frequency, not eventually, but immediately, not approximately, but precisely, not sometimes, but always. The gap between the shift and the visible evidence of the shift is not a sign that nothing is happening. It is the season between planting and harvest, necessary, trustworthy, and already full of growth that your eyes simply haven't learned to see yet. This is the part of the journey that separates those who arrive from those who almost arrive. Not the commanding, not the frequency work, not even the releasing. This, the sustained navigation of the space between the command and its visible fulfillment. The interval that tests every conviction you've developed, that sends resistance wearing the disguises of prudence and realism and spiritual maturity, that asks you repeatedly and with increasing sophistication whether you actually believe what you say you believe. This is where the cosmic green light proves itself, not in the dramatic moments of manifestation, but in the quiet, unglamorous, extraordinarily important moments when nothing visible has changed yet and you have to decide, again, what's true. There was an alchemist named Caleb who became legendary among those who understood the deeper mysteries.
not for what he created in his laboratory, but for what he understood about the nature of the materials he worked with. While other alchemists spent their careers avoiding the most toxic and dangerous elements, treating them as obstacles to be worked around, Caleb had discovered something that took him years of failure to fully comprehend. The most poisonous substances, properly transmuted, yielded the most powerful medicines. Nightshade, properly transformed, became a healing agent of extraordinary potency. Venom, alchemically altered, could restore what ordinary compounds could not touch. The obstacles were not separate from the path. They were the path in disguise. What Caleb discovered in his laboratory mirrors the single most important and most consistently misunderstood truth of conscious creation. Resistance is not the enemy of manifestation. Resistance is raw material awaiting transformation. Every obstacle you encounter on your path toward your desire carries within it, encoded in its very structure, the specific quality of power that your manifestation requires in order to be complete. The doubt that arises isn't evidence that you're wrong to want what you want. It's revealing precisely where your frequency needs strengthening. The fear that surfaces isn't a warning to retreat. It's pointing with remarkable accuracy to the location of your greatest available growth. The impatience that burns when things don't move on your timeline isn't a flaw in your character. It's showing you exactly where trust requires deepening. Every form of resistance, when you learn to read it rather than fight it or collapse under it, is a precise map to the next level of your creative power. 7 forms of resistance appear on the path of conscious creation, and each one carries a specific gift when properly transmuted. Doubt reveals where your power needs strengthening. Meet it not with suppression, but with deeper alignment, with a return to the frequency of genuine certainty rather than a performance of it. Fear points precisely to where your greatest growth awaits. It has never pointed anywhere else, not once in human history. And the moment you recognize fear as a compass rather than a stop sign, your relationship with it changes completely. Unworthiness indicates where self-love must be cultivated, not self-improvement, not achievement, not earning your way to adequacy, but the specific practice of recognizing your inherent worth, independent of any evidence the world has or hasn't provided. Impatience shows where trust requires deepening, and trust, genuine trust, is not a feeling you wait to have, but a practice you engage in repeatedly until it becomes the ground you stand on, rather than the thing you're reaching for. Attachment highlights where surrender will set you free, not the surrender of your desire, but the surrender of your insistence on controlling the form and timing of its arrival. Conflict with higher purpose reveals where your commands require realignment with something truer and deeper than what your current level of awareness can fully perceive. And unconscious sabotage, the subtlest and most confounding of the 7, illuminates where shadow work will yield the greatest light, where the parts of you that haven't yet been brought into the fullness of your awareness are quietly, reliably working at cross purposes with your stated desires. High in mountains where clouds gathered at mid-morning and dissolved by afternoon, there lived a woman named Genevieve, who had been trying for 3 years to reach a destination on the other side of a great forested ridge. Each time she set out, fallen trees blocked her path. Not one or two, dozens sometimes, in configurations that seemed almost deliberate in their thoroughness. She had turned back more times than she could count, each time more frustrated, each time more convinced that the path was simply not meant for her. Then one morning, exhausted from another failed attempt, she sat down on a fallen trunk and stopped fighting. A forest guardian appeared, the kind of figure who appears in stories because some truths are too large for ordinary narration, and shared an observation so simple it rearranged everything. The fallen trees were not blocking the path. They were the path. Each one, turned from obstacle into bridge, would carry her higher and further than the clear ground beneath it. Genevieve spent the rest of that day learning to walk on fallen trees, and she crossed the ridge before sunset. Your obstacles are fallen trees, every single one of them. And the skill you're developing, the specific, powerful, increasingly natural skill of reading resistance as information rather than opposition, is the skill of seeing the bridge inside the blockage. It doesn't come instantly. It comes through practice, through the repeated experience of transmuting what felt like a dead end into a doorway. But once you've done it enough times, once you've accumulated enough evidence that the pattern is real and reliable, something shifts permanently in your relationship with difficulty. It stops being something that happens to you and starts being something that's happening for you. And that shift, that specific, durable, experiential shift in perception, is one of the most powerful frequency elevations available on the human journey. The Gratitude Gateway. Of all the frequencies available to you, of all the emotional states you can consciously cultivate, gratitude is the one that the wisdom traditions across the entire breadth of human history have pointed to with the most consistent emphasis. Not because it feels good, though it does. Not because it's virtuous, though in its genuine form it is. But because of what it does in the quantum field. Genuine gratitude, not performed gratitude, not gratitude as technique, not the gratitude you generate because you've been told it's important, is a frequency so precisely aligned with abundance that it functions as a direct instruction broadcast into the field. More of this. I am the kind of being for whom this is natural and welcome. I recognize abundance when it arrives, and I am a reliable receiver of it. The field, reading that frequency, responds with the only response available to it under the law of resonance. It sends more of what matches. In a busy marketplace that has existed in some form in every culture across every era of human history, a merchant named Isaiah discovered something through a mysterious ledger that became the most important business education he ever received. Each evening he recorded his inventory, not organized by value or by category, but by his genuine, felt appreciation for each item. Not what was worth the most money, not what had arrived most recently, what he actually, genuinely, in his specific way of experiencing things, felt grateful for. He noticed over weeks and then months
that items for which he felt real appreciation would multiply in unexpected ways, through gifts, through discoveries, through the appearance of suppliers he hadn't sought, through customers who paid more than asked because of the specific quality of what they sensed in the exchange. When he tested the pattern by attempting to feel gratitude for items he didn't actually value, performing the feeling, generating the words without the genuine frequency, nothing happened. The ledger stayed exactly as it was. The universe, he understood, was not reading his behavior. It was reading his actual frequency. It always had been. It could not read anything else. The path of gratitude unfolds through distinct stages that most people pass through sequentially as their practice deepens. The first and most accessible stage is appreciation for the obvious blessings, the things that are clearly, unambiguously good in your life right now, the things you would notice immediately if they disappeared. Health, shelter, the specific people you love, the small daily pleasures that are easy to overlook until they're gone. Beginning here is not a beginner's compromise. It is the honest starting point that all genuine practice requires. The second stage is the recognition of disguised blessings, the ability to find genuine, not forced, not performed, but actual gratitude for circumstances that presented themselves as difficulties. This stage cannot be rushed or manufactured. It arrives through the accumulation of enough experience with obstacle as bridge that you begin to trust the pattern before the evidence is fully visible. The third stage is gratitude for desires as though they are already fulfilled, holding what you've commanded with the felt quality of someone who is genuinely thankful for something they've already received. This is the stage that most powerfully bridges present reality and future manifestation, because it inhabits in frequency the very state that draws your desire from the field into physical form. And the deepest stage, which arrives not through effort, but through the natural ripening of practice over time, is formless gratitude. Pure appreciation for existence itself, for the extraordinary, improbable, staggering fact of being alive and conscious in a universe of infinite creative potential. Now, the physical anchoring. The bridge between the spiritual and the material requires conscious touchpoints in the physical world. Objects, actions, environments, sensory experiences that serve as living reminders of your frequency and your command. Not because the universe requires physical symbols to understand your intention, but because you live in a physical body, in a physical world, and the physical dimensions of your experience are channels through which the quantum field communicates with you, and through which you communicate back. Every conscious anchor you create, every object chosen with specific intention, every space arranged to reflect your desire, every daily action performed as a ritual of alignment serves as a resonant frequency holder in your physical environment, continuously broadcasting and receiving, continuously reinforcing the signal you're transmitting into the field. A painter named Dorothea created landscapes of extraordinary beauty that nevertheless remained somehow inert, technically accomplished, visually striking, but missing something that she could sense but not name. The breakthrough came accidentally, in a moment of improvisation that she almost didn't allow herself. She mixed a small amount of soil from her garden, soil she had worked with her hands, soil she knew intimately, into her paint. The result surprised her before it surprised anyone else. The landscape that emerged from that session had a quality of presence that her previous work had lacked. Not just visually, experientially. People stood before it differently. They stayed longer. They said things they couldn't quite explain about feeling like they were actually there rather than looking at a representation of there. She began experimenting deliberately. Soil from different places, water from specific sources, elements chosen for their resonance with the quality she wanted the work to carry. The paintings became, in a sense she understood but couldn't fully articulate, living bridges between the inner reality she was painting from and the physical reality the viewer was standing in. Your physical anchors are those paintings. They are the conscious creation of bridges between the frequency you're inhabiting and the physical world that is, moment by moment, reorganizing itself around that frequency. The timeless present. This is the dimension of your creative power that most consistently goes unrecognized and therefore untapped, even by those who have understood everything else with genuine clarity. Your greatest creative power exists only in the eternal now. Not in the future where your desire will manifest, not in the past where the evidence of your previous frequency lives. Now. This specific moment, the only moment that has ever existed or will ever exist from the perspective of the quantum field, where there is no past and no future, only the infinite, available, responsive present. When you anchor yourself completely in the present moment, not as a technique, not for 5 minutes of formal meditation, but as a continuous quality of presence woven through your living day, you access a creative power that your thoughts about yesterday and tomorrow consistently dilute and distort. A woman named Hannah discovered this in a garden where time seemed to operate by different rules than the world beyond its walls. She noticed that when she brought her full, undivided, completely present attention to any plant in the garden, not thinking about the garden while looking at it, but actually being with it, all of her available for this one moment with this one living thing, the plant would respond in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Growth that happened too fast, blooms that appeared overnight, a vitality that exceeded what the conditions warranted. And she noticed that the quality of presence she was bringing to the garden was the same quality she'd been reaching for her entire life in her relationships, in her work, in her experience of herself. The quality of being actually here, fully here, all the way here, not divided between this moment and the 1,000 other moments competing for her attention. The garden was teaching her not horticulture. It was teaching her presence. And presence, she came to understand, was not a practice separate from manifestation. It was manifestation's single most essential condition. The universe responds not to the length of time you hold a desire, but to the depth of presence with which you command it into being. A single moment of complete, genuine, whole-being presence carries more creative force than months of divided, distracted, half-hearted intention. When you are completely here, when the past has been released and the future has been released, and there is only this breath, this moment, this frequency, this clear and unwavering command issued from the full depth of what you are. The field receives you with a clarity that makes manifestation not just possible, but structurally inevitable. Because in that moment of complete presence, there is no gap between you and your desire. There is only the frequency, and the frequency is the thing. As you look back now, and you can because you've traveled far enough in this transmission to look back with some perspective, you can see the spiral nature of what this journey actually is. You don't progress in a straight line toward mastery. You progress through ascending cycles that revisit the same core truths with expanded awareness, deeper integration, greater capacity. The same themes return: abundance, relationship, purpose, creative power. But each time they return, they're asking for a deeper level of response, a more complete surrender, a more genuine certainty, a more unwavering command. Each cycle builds on the one before it. Each turn of the spiral carries you higher than the one before it, even when it seems like you're covering familiar ground. In a distant city, a woman named Josephine discovered a spiral staircase in an ancient tower that seemed to respond to the quality of her consciousness as she climbed. The first steps were plain wood, solid and practical. As she ascended, they transformed, becoming more beautiful, more refined, more luminous with each revolution. And she herself transformed alongside the staircase, each level awakening capacities that the level below had prepared her for, but that she couldn't have accessed from there. What had seemed like the ceiling of her capability at any given level revealed itself, from the next level up, to have been simply the floor. The staircase had no top. It kept opening upward. And so, she understood, did she. This is the infinite spiral of your own becoming. There is no arrival point from which the journey is complete. There is no level of mastery from which there is nothing further. There is only the next turn, the next level, the next expansion of what you thought was possible for someone like you. And the extraordinary, reliable, endlessly available discovery that what's possible for someone like you is always, always more than your current level of awareness can fully perceive. So here you stand, in your sovereign power, with the cosmic green light not as something approaching from the distance, but as something emanating from within you, as your own frequency, recognized, owned, lived. The veil that once separated you from the truth of your creative authority has not been removed by these words. Words don't remove veils, but words can remind you that the veil was never solid, that it was always thinner than it appeared, that the light it seemed to block was always there on the other side, and that the only thing the veil was ever made of was your temporary forgetting of what you have always been. You have always been a conscious creator. You came into this life as one. Every experience you've had, every struggle, every disappointment, every moment of doubt, every instance of reaching for something and finding your hand empty, has been the process of a conscious creator learning, through the specific friction of experience, to create more consciously. Not punishment, not evidence of unworthiness. Education, the most personalized, most precise, most comprehensive education available in this universe. The education of living, of feeling, of failing and trying again, of reaching the frequency of readiness through the actual lived experience of what it takes to get there. And now you're here. The frequency is clear. The signal is clean. The command is issued. Not in the words of this transmission, but in the quality of your presence as you've received it. In the shift that has been happening beneath the surface of your awareness since the first sentence found you. In the subtle but unmistakable recalibration of your inner state that happens when truth meets readiness, and something clicks into place. The cosmic green light is not waiting for you. It has already activated. It activated in the moment your frequency reached the threshold of genuine readiness. The moment that was encoded in your journey long before this day, moving through every experience that brought you here, every detour that turned out to be the most direct route, every apparent delay that was actually precise preparation. From this day forward, you walk in the awareness that as you command with clarity and certainty, the universe responds with perfect, faithful, unwavering precision. Not as your servant, as the extension of your own expanded self, as the field that you are made of and that is made of you, that has always been listening, always been responding, always been working. With more intelligence and more care and more perfect timing than your planning mind can access, toward the fulfillment of what you truly are. The spiral continues upward. The commands grow more refined. The manifestations grow more elegant. The understanding grows more profound. And the light, your light, the cosmic green light that was never anywhere but within you, shines with increasing clarity on paths of possibility that were always present and are now finally seen. You didn't stumble upon this transmission, you summoned it. And the universe, which always keeps its promises, delivered it. Now go, create, command, and receive what has already been set in motion. It is done.